Today, 2 hours of news, current affairs, and opinion. Brought to you by Beyond Beijing. With in-depth panel discussions on domestic and global issues, Today brings you the story behind the headlines. Locally produced, but with a distinctly international flavor. Today.
Welcome to Today on Beyond Beijing. I'm Abhishan Barua.
And I'm Zhao Yang. So today's big debate is on Chinese graduates face tough job market.
And after that, Xu Jingruo and John Artman will be here in the studio for Global Talk. In the world headlines, we'll have the knife attack on soldier in Paris, which is being treated as terrorism. Syria says it will attend the Geneva talks in principle. Colombia and the FARC rebels reach an agreement on land reform. And African Union leaders mark the 50th anniversary in Ethiopia.
And then our China report brings us China has signed the framework of a free trade agreement with Switzerland, and China and U.S. agreed to share audit details. Beijing to shut coal-fired boilers to clean up air, and Anning government reverses a real name face mask purchase policy.
And now turning to the big discussion topic of the day. This year, nearly 6.9 million students are expected to graduate from college, which is an increase of 190,000 compared with 2012. This number is thought to be the highest since the People's Republic of China was founded back in 1949. Now, one of the most important indexes of employment, the job contract signing rate, is actually on a downward slope compared with last year, indicating that 2013 could be a tough year for graduates. Up to the 1st of May, the job contract signing rate in Beijing reached 33.6%, which was up 5% from the figures in April. With China struggling to transform its economy, the GDP growth has been reduced from almost double digits to just around 7%, and every 1% drop means more than 1 million jobs wiped out. Again, many people are saying that this year marks the toughest job situation for college graduates ever. Today, our panel of experts will examine the situation closely, how tough it is, what the possible factors are contributing to such a situation, and how to resolve the pressure.
So today we're talking in the studio with He Xiaoxue, researcher of MICAS, an educational data consulting firm, and also Robert Parkinson, CEO and founder of RMG Selection. And also joining us on the line is Mike Baston, researcher at Nottingham University School of Contemporary Chinese Studies.
As always, welcome to all three of you for joining us, both of you here in the studio and, of course, Mike on the line. Now, over this past decade, number of new graduates from Chinese universities has supposedly increased sixfold to nearly 6 million a year. This year, nearly 7 million students expected to graduate, but people are saying at the same time that there aren't enough jobs out there. Apparently, it's a very tough job hunting market. I want to start with you, Robert. Do you think that's a fair assumption, firstly?
Good morning. Yes, I think it's. I do feel some empathy with people graduating university and struggling to get a job. But I think that, and I would also agree with the numbers. I think there's been a 15% decrease in jobs available for new graduates based on last year, and it would make some sense that due to the global hold, if you like, on the economy, there is a bit of a freeze on jobs. But I think we also have to see this in the perspective of the rest of the world. And according to the OECD countries, China has just 7.6% unemployment, which is, based on the OECD average, is 17.1%. We have these horrendous figures in places like Greece, where parts of Greece have up to 75% youth unemployment. And even in a developed country that's doing something about its economy like the UK, we have still 20.7% unemployment. So I think we have to take it in the context of the rest of the world, not least the United States, by the way, which is doing pretty well at the moment. And I think there is a little element of students finding it tough simply because it's been very easy over the last 10 years or so, and they've had job offers, as long as their arm, really. So I do think there are jobs out there if they go looking for them, and I think the issues are very often not the lack of jobs, it's a lack of the correct skills, it's a lack of understanding of how to apply for jobs, and it's greater support in the application process and the, if you like, becoming more proactive and a bit of a mindset change rather than anything else.
Mike, let's bring you into the discussion here. Are those the complete picture of the problems here, or perhaps do you think there's something else maybe causing this shortage in jobs? Well, perceived shortage of jobs, as Robert puts it in some respect. Do you think there are any additional factors here?
I think the only thing I'd like to add, when I agree basically with that picture that Robert paints, but I think for Chinese graduates, the disadvantage they face is that Chinese universities, I don't think, prepare them as well as, say, typical European and US universities for the job market in terms of developing their personal skills, presentation skills, organizational skills. There's not that emphasis in Chinese universities, and that really is what's important very often in getting that job. That's where the competition lies.
He Xiaoshui, what kind of preparations do students actually get put through here in Chinese universities, if any?
Morning, everyone. But to answer your question, as far as I know, the Chinese students here are really lack of how to present themselves in front of companies, employers, to really show their skills.
Good point.
And as a matter of fact, actually, there are people who are trying using different ways to show themselves, such as using Weibo to show their work piece, and other kind of way by using internet to show their masterpiece of the school year, which is really amazing at one hand. On the other hand, there are still a very small amount of students who do so, and most of students don't have the skill.
Mac Baston, it seems that all the guests do agree that there is not so lack of job opportunities on the market. It seems it is the mismatch between graduates turnout by many schools and the skills that the market or sorted by the employers or the markets. But education seems to be very important or a key complaint about the young. But is the education they are currently receiving truly under-preparing them for the working world and the market? And isn't the education system improving during the past few generations or decades?
I think it's certainly improved, and I've been part of it for many years in Beijing and other cities. But I still think there's a mismatch there, and I don't think the Chinese education system is really linked as much as it could be to the business world and business opportunities, which in the case of the UK, certainly in UK business schools, that's certainly the case. So I certainly think there's further improvement there. But as Hershui's point about developing students' presentation skills, the ability to come across well and present themselves, that's certainly an area that I found is really not there at all in Chinese universities, even in Chinese business schools.
But Robert, actually, we now not only the graduates from the domestic universities, the Chinese universities, we also have a lot of students study overseas, and then they are graduates from the US or UK or other countries. But survey shows that they are even less employable. So, what do you think are the reason for that?
Well, this is a very interesting point, and this is I think you're quoting from one of our surveys we did recently, and it did find that people who came back with a master's from... There were certain higher degrees that were highly marketable, but people with a master's degree from a sort of average to middle university in America or Britain often were at the back of the queue because they had very high salary expectations. There's this kind of urban myth in China that if you study overseas, you can get twice or even three times the salary you can get compared to other people. Also, the many employers I know actually look at people with a master's degree or an MBA done early or something. And I'll give you a direct quote from one of our clients, CEO of a major British manufacturer in China, who said, "For goodness sake, Robert, whatever you do, don't send me any candidates with an MBA, because the first thing you've got to do is unlearn it." And you know, I thought it was a funny story, but I think there's elements of truth in that. In that people, if they have a so-called better standard of education, don't necessarily want to start from the beginning in their careers, but that's exactly where employers do want them to start.
Is that also an issue of the difference between bookish knowledge and the knowledge and skills that you supposedly learn from universities, as opposed to actually learning practical skills from just working your way up the ladder, say, getting an undergraduate degree and just begin working and just gaining your knowledge through work experience? How big a disparity is that?
I think that's absolutely right. I think that's a very good point. I think it's people are desperate to practice the skills. They're very theoretical skills they've been taught at business schools in America and Europe. But in fact, employers don't necessarily want them to go and do just that. They want them to start from the beginning and learn as engineers or HR professionals or whatever it happens to be. And the first thing you do in a job like that is probably not to apply that complex master's level theory. Just to go back to the other point in terms of the skills, I think there are many examples in China at the moment of sectors which are absolutely booming, and one of those would be the medical sector. The medical and private hospital industry in China is growing at a vast rate, and I think the universities are simply not preparing graduates with these types of skills, or it's not seen as desirable. So, for example, in the areas of biotechnology or pharmaceuticals or medicine, we're still importing often ethnically Chinese people, but nevertheless foreigners from overseas to come back to China, which is an example of where China could be more organised in its planning of university syllabuses and arrange to have more homegrown talent.
And for the major of biotechnic, for the medical and pharmaceutical, we found from Micah's survey showing that in the 2011 graduates, this kind of majors, they suffered most about the unemployment. So, Robert, how do you explain that?
Well, that's a really interesting point, and I think one of the things that we found with our recent talent flow survey is that the need to move around China and be more flexible in location is very apparent. And we've seen a great increase in hiring in second and third tier cities, and a great demand for people to be agile and be flexible in terms of their location patterns, which of course, as many people are now having children a bit later on, in their early 30s, people are more willing to do. So to look at a positive for a second, you do have a labour market that has that willingness to move around and relocate. Yeah.
And He Xiaoxue, so how do you explain that? And I know that Micah's, you do annually the graduates' employment report, but during the past 3 or 4 years, what changes of trend do you find?
Well, actually, to answer one of those questions, what are the other factors might influence people, graduates' employment? That is the general economic climate. So when you see the GDP drops, obviously the employment rate will also drop a little. That's part of the influence. And to answer the question just now, you mentioned about the pharmaceutical and the biochemical, medical employment rate, because I think for these professions, students get little internships as they will have in the Western world, which, because I study abroad and I'm a psychology student, we're supposed to have at least a year, like 300 hours of internship practice, which in China you don't have it. And then when they go on for employment, they caught in the, it's like catch-22. The employers want their working experience. And on the other hand, students don't have this working experience, nor they have any internship.
Can I come back to you on an interesting little anecdote on this point? Because I think you make a great point here. And I've heard it reported that many people kind of whinge about not being able to get internships. Mm-hmm. In the last 9 years of running 2 companies in Beijing, I have had one person come and knock on my door and say, I'd like to see the boss and I'd like to work for your company. And that person okay, I'm not running a pharmaceutical or healthcare business. It's a different business. But that person turned out to be one of the absolute superstars. So I think there are things you can do to be much, much more proactive. And I think in the case of advanced scientific industries, there's no reason why you can't reach out to professionals, you can't make connections in order to give yourself more of a chance of internships and the like.
I totally agree. I have the same example in my case, which is a Chinese student came into our company in our research and said she wants an internship without payment. That's fine.
Yeah.
After 3 months, all of us just loved her.
Yeah.
And no matter who she invited to us, like she said, "Oh, I recommend this person to come to your research center," we welcome them for no reason because she got the credit. We trust her.
Sure.
Well, it seems like proactivity is being flagged as one of the key skills to have here. On that note, we are going to take a quick break here on the show. We will be back in a few minutes' time. We're talking in the studio with He Xiaoshui and Robert Parkinson. We're also joined on the line by Mike Bastian. We'll be back in a short while. You're listening to Today on Beyond Beijing.
Missed some of today's big debate? No need to panic. Follow us on iTunes. Just search for Today on Beyond Beijing and subscribe to have our podcast delivered to you every day.
All of that to look forward to in the second half of our show. You're listening to Today on Beyond Beijing. I'm Abhijan Barua. Today's big discussion, of course, Chinese graduates facing a tougher job market. I'm here in the studio with Zhao Yang, my co-host. Also joining me in the studio, He Xiaoshui, senior researcher of MyCourse, and Robert Parkinson, CEO and founder of RMG Selection. We've also got Mike Bastian on the line, researcher at Nottingham University School of Contemporary Chinese Studies. Now, returning to the discussion, we just heard a few moments earlier something about GDP and employment relations. I believe He Xiaoshui brought that point up. If GDP goes down, then it's assumed, or apparently that's the trend, that employment goes down as well. I'm going to start with Mike here. Could you possibly explain the actual relationship between GDP and employment? How does it work exactly?
Well, obviously, I think the main factor here is confidence and investment in an economy. So when GDP does go down, you do find that companies tend to scale down and tend to reduce any investment and expansion, and therefore their recruitment numbers will probably suffer. So that there's almost certainly an inverse relationship there. I think in the case of China, though, I just want to make the point that we haven't made so far, is that many Chinese companies still haven't really expanded internationally and haven't adopted a more modern business approach. So the demand for the sort of modern business analyst or graduate trainee jobs that are in many Western companies just isn't there in the Chinese companies at the moment, and that's why many Chinese university graduates try to look for employment overseas or with a foreign company, preferably in China.
However, that being said, we do have surveys which says 2/3 of Chinese graduates say they would rather work for the government or big state-owned firms rather than at private companies. Do we know why that is?
I've seen these surveys. I'm not really sure where that information comes from. I can only suspect that perhaps some feel that the benefits are better, the security is better, maybe they have guanxi within those organizations and they don't feel comfortable in a private company, but I do find that a little bit hard to believe.
Robert, could this be an accurate assumption that perhaps Chinese companies aren't offering as much to potential employees as say somebody else might? Is that a fair factor?
I think that could be true. I think that most young people in the kind of 20 to 35 age bracket that I speak to desire to work for foreign companies, actually, because they have the experience to interact with quote-unquote foreigners, to practice their language skills, and they well know that will serve them well in terms of the rest of their career. Just to come back, if I may, to the last point about, is there a deficiency in jobs or not? I think one of the things that isn't covered is the fact that many of the jobs pre this year, pre these numbers, or even pre the 2008 crash, many of the jobs weren't filled in the first place. So there was a huge supply of the demand for positions. So I think that's worth keeping in mind with the figures. And if I can give you a very recent example of a client that we work with, it was a logistics company we went to see the other day, and we said, how's business and stuff? And they said, it's tough this year in China. It's really, it's difficult. And I thought, okay, well, they're not going to be hiring anyone then, are they? And by the end of the conversation, they'd reeled off a list of at least 35 fairly senior jobs that we were looking for urgently.
Right.
And, so this notion of it's tough out there is completely different here to what it might be back in Europe or the US.
Is this just a difference in expectations between employers and employees, or is there also, say, a case where these people are looking for employees to fill in these fairly senior or mid-level positions? But is there a possibility that there are people out there looking for jobs, but they don't quite know where to look? Are they well directed?
I think that's also very true. I think people are, particularly young graduates, are very unfamiliar with how to behave, how to apply for jobs in the first place. They assume that mailing off their CVs on an automatic system on an internet job site is going to be enough, and that is a good application. When it's dreadful. It's the last resort. So they're not very familiar with how to do job interviews. People. The number of times I've heard, hello, my name is Honey Zhang. I'm a happy young 21-year-old girl from the Heilongjiang province. That sort of thing.
Sounds more like a dating profile.
Exactly, repeated rote. But this is how they're taught to do it.
But do you have some suggestions to the graduates when they first in the job market to hunting for jobs?
I think that they need to take in a range of different resources. I think rather than focusing in on one resource, i.e. their university, and listening to what their professor has told them is the right way to apply for a job, looking round, reading round the market, seeing a range of different suggestions, and then picking up the common threads, because the common threads tend to be the truth, if you like, that you're trying to find out. I think, going back to the previous point, definitely proactivity is important. Internships are important, and I'll tell you why. The reason is most jobs actually aren't advertised. Most jobs are not put on the internet. Most jobs are referrals. They're put through companies such as my own, but they're certainly not advertised in large print for all to see. So if you don't know people, if you're not out there proactively creating connections, you'll make it very difficult for yourself.
Now, He Xiaoshui, I mean, from listening to both Mike and Robert, it seems like there's obviously a lot more to do than just sending off your CV and keeping your fingers crossed. Now, all these factors that Robert mentioned, such as the way you conduct yourself when you're looking for a job, or when you introduce yourself, these aesthetics. Now, obviously, you can't know about them by magic. You need somebody to tell you, either if they speak to Robert directly or at university, where you'd expect some experts to come through every now and again and give you some guidance. Is that kind of guidance available at all for students?
I believe in the Chinese universities, we do have some level of institute or department who can help these students to find jobs. But I think for one thing is students don't really know how to target their employers. I mean, to make them, to catch their eyeballs, let's say,
right,
literally. So it's not just simply, I think the school also provide and inform students, but it's for students, they just don't, they're still waiting. They're waiting the job to come to them instead of they reach out.
Is it also a case of, exceeding, higher expectations rather? Because the example you mentioned earlier, the person who came to your firm and they just said, I'd like to work, I don't need to be paid, I just want the experience. Is that kind of an example just one in a million, or does that happen more often than that? Because
I would say that's an exception.
Well, you'd imagine that kind of example to be then propagated and promoted to other students, then wouldn't you?
I would say that's a rare case in general. because it's really hard for students to really put themselves as like let's say a product, and to show people, to perform themselves in front of the companies and say, I'm this good, I'm capable of doing so, why don't you employ me?
But Mike, seems like that's exactly what we've been saying up until now, that's what graduates need to do more often.
Exactly.
They need to promote themselves as a product who have certain skills which could be presented to the employers as services that they could acquire.
That's right, and I think that they need more help, more direct help within their Chinese university education. Maybe a job search, a job skills module, first of all, which really forces them to think about the skills and targeting, and also a career development mentality. I found amongst Chinese students, and still find amongst Chinese students, that they don't have that even medium-term perspective that many UK graduates do have. They're not focused on an industry or a particular career development plan. They're really just looking for that job, that first job, obviously, that pays. And I think that needs to change.
And Mac Barston, also we have a phenomenon here in China is that a lot of graduates, they sit for the national examination for the civil servants. It seems that years ago, 20 years ago in 1990s, their parents' generation just leave the safe shore of government work to jump into the sea. And now it seems a lot of graduates now, they want to go to the government or SOEs. So why is this trend reversed now?
Well, we raised this earlier. I'm not really sure what's behind that. I can only think that they feel that this is a more secure career path, and that the benefits are better, and they usually join. I think they want to join a government organisation or some sort of civil service career when they have contacts and connections, and they feel that will help them with their career path. So I don't really see it as a very positive thing.
And He Xiaoxue, do you think this is because today's graduates, they are lack of entrepreneurship, or they are more wants to avoid the risks?
I think part of the reason I have to agree, because students are really looking for a more safety job, let's say in that way. But also, according to Micah's our online survey, we have this, actually up to now, we started this survey in the end of October last year and stopped until this year, April the 10th. So during this period, we found that actually 30% of this year graduate students actually sign up the contract with private sectors and small business.
Okay.
Yeah.
And Robert, what do you think are the reasons, and what do you think today's graduates, when they are hunting for a job, what elements that they pay much attention to?
Sure. Well, I just to give my answer on the local government or the government civil service point. I think that clearly when you've had a country which has undergone enormous structural changes, and you now have a proportion of society who, frankly, enjoy tremendous wealth, and another proportion, which this burgeoning middle class, it's no real surprise that people are looking for the less riskier jobs. I would also draw the comparison with the UK, which hires, the best first-class Oxbridge graduates for its civil service. And it's seen as a prestigious, to be a Mandarin, which is a top civil servant in the UK, is seen as a prestigious job. The other point, if I may, I'd just like to go back on one of Mike's points, which I thought was a really good one, in terms of what young Chinese students need. I think the point about transferable skills is really important. And I think if I look to the UK 20 years ago, everyone stopped talking about learning by rote and having a vast body of knowledge, and people started talking about having extended languages, having IT skills, communication skills, ability to get on with different people. And I think this is important in terms of career planning for Chinese people, because what we have to make sure is that 15 years into our careers, if markets suddenly change, if things change, we can be flexible too and change with it.
And on that note, we're going to take a quick break here once more. You're listening to Today on Beyond Beijing. I'm Abhishan Barua. We're talking about Chinese graduates facing tough job markets. We'll be back shortly.
Join our debate via Weibo. Go to weibo.com/todayonbeyondbeijing and send us your questions or ideas on today's big debate.
Today's words shape tomorrow's discourse.
The future starts today.
Today's talk, tomorrow's world. Today.
And once again, all of that coming up on the second half of our show. You're listening to Today on Beyond Beijing. I'm Abhishan Barua. Today's big discussion is Chinese graduates facing tougher job markets.
And I'm Zhao Yang. So today we're talking in the studio with He Xiaoxue, a senior researcher of MICUS, an educational data consulting firm, and also Robert Parkinson, CEO and founder of RMG Selection. And also joining us on the line is Mac Baston, researcher at Nottingham University School of Contemporary Chinese Studies. But now back to our panel discussions. So Robert, we just now talk about some the graduates, Chinese graduates, they face challenges when they go to the job market. And also, it seems that unemployment is an international issue. It's not a specific China issue. But do you think a underemployment is also an issue for Chinese job market, especially for those young graduates? Because some survey shows that nearly half of the college graduates in 2011 studied at wages below those paid to migrant workers who work in the factories and the construction sites. So is this a common practice now, or is it a series of problems for the society?
Well, that's very interesting, and I think there's a couple of points on that. I think in terms of the issue of people's university graduates starting salaries, they are having to compete with people, with many other graduates in the first tier cities for so-called white collar jobs. So it wouldn't surprise me if people are starting on salaries which are equivalent to or lower than migrant workers. And if I can think back to my own studies time, I mean, I used to work in a cold storage factory for Sainsbury's, and you actually got paid quite a lot, and the people there, because it was tedious work. So there's some logic to that. I think in terms of underemployment, I think there are many many young graduates who, when asked what do they want, will give you a very long list of what they don't want, and they'll tell you that they don't want to travel, and they don't want a job where they have to work too hard, and they don't want to be too stressful, and they don't want this, and they don't want that, and they don't want the other. Well, what do they want? I think this is the big question.
And what do they want? We asked this question to He Xiaoxue from MICUS. So according to your report or your annual survey to the graduates' employment issue, so what do they want actually when they look for the first job after their graduation?
There is actually one definition difference here, because in MICUS, when we're talking about underemployment, we meant that people who work, which is not what they major in when they're in universities. So that's a big difference. According to us, with this definition, there are, for class 2011, there are 14% of graduates who are under employment, and 10% of them which are voluntarily under employment. Which I think for students at this, based on how we define this term, is that students want to have a job immediately, as soon as they graduate, regardless what kind of job they actually found according to their major. And then they want to have some experience, because no matter which job they find, the employers will always ask for their working experience. So they want to have this working experience at first, regardless their payment or what they're majoring. And then I think that's part of the reason that is causing this underemployment phenomenon.
Now, this point of work experience, we have been bouncing back and forth off that. I'd like to bring Robert and Mike back into the conversation. Now, we've been talking about, bringing up examples of Britain. I suppose I could throw one into the mix as well. Often you see local governments back in Britain getting involved with different firms and offering internships and different kinds of work experience opportunities. You have graduate fairs and things like that, which are quite heavily promoted. Would that sort of a thing, if, say, the local governments get involved in China, do you two think that could possibly provide a way forward for the students? I'll start with Robert here.
Sure. I think, as far as I understand, that China is making some efforts to do that, and I know some of our bigger clients spend a lot of their time. The recruiting people spend a lot of their time on graduate recruiting every year. So I think they are engaged in that. But I think that the issue often is at those graduate recruitment fairs, they are designed to mop up. All the big organisations do it. The big banks do it. Goldman Sachs will do it. So they're designed to mop up the best people. But I think the issue, what we're really talking about, may be the bulk of people who are perhaps not from the top universities, but the larger group of middle class, if you like, people who are a bit disenchanted and not quite sure what to do. To answer the other point about underemployment, I think one of the things I've heard from the horse's mouth, so to speak, from many people, is the reason for going overseas to do a master's degree is because they couldn't get a job, or they couldn't get a job that they wanted enough. So they just thought, okay, let's go and do another university degree. I would count the number of people in the West that could have the luxury to afford to be in that position.
Right, and Mike, again, going back to the involvement of government, we'll come back to this latest point Robert's made as well. Would you say there's more that the government could do? Because from what Robert said, I personally gathered that it's more like to borrow his term, mopping up the best talents available out there. But what about the ones who aren't maybe the best of the best, but they will be good enough with a little bit of help? Is that a bit of help being provided at all?
I don't think it is. I think there's much more that could be done. I think you have to do this primarily through the Chinese university system, which is what's happened in the UK. Typically, certainly business students and students on other courses in the UK nearly always do a year's placement, a year in industry as part of their normally 4-year degree, so between their second and final year. And that sort of thing, in my experience in Chinese universities, just doesn't happen. But it won't happen unless the university actually go out, search and set up this system, which is what happens in the UK. And I've personally been involved quite a few years ago in this. And once you do that, the employers are a little bit hesitant at first, in my experience, finally do become very, very happy with the situation, because they get resources and relatively low cost, and also they get a chance to look at a potential employee over the course of a year. So I think the government could start this initiative, but certainly Chinese universities, I think, need to take up the baton here and approach Chinese industry.
And this is obviously just talking about business students. Now, I remember when I was in university, as you mentioned, the business schools of the universities, they would have these tie-ups with different firms. While other degrees didn't quite, they more encouraged you to go out and find something on your own, and they'll give you some pointers like that. And one of the most common one was, look, when you tell them that you want to work for free, they've got nothing to lose. They get an extra pair of hands. They'll be more than happy to welcome you as long as you're proactive. Now, from that respect, is there something that could be done here to encourage the different firms to be a bit more open-minded towards graduates as well? Or is the onus completely on the graduates for not having done enough yet?
Is that to me?
Yeah.
I think it's a combination of things. Certainly the graduates, I don't think you can really blame them. It's something new, and that they haven't really had, perhaps they don't have the initiative to do this, but certainly the universities and maybe the local industry as well in partnership could set this up, maybe with some government help and some government finance to get this ball rolling, and I think it really would help a lot, yes.
Right. Sure.
To reflect the other side, or the Chinese graduates more positively, actually, because I think it's credit where it's due. I come across very many people who actually are very proactive, and super smart people who sit there and tell you why they want to do an internship, and also tell you about the 10 other internships they've done in the last 2 years. And I think that's laudable. So there are people out there who are really going great guns and making every effort to be proactive. And perhaps it's the other group of students who aren't doing that, who are feeling the kind of heat effect of that competition.
Right. Well, on that note, we're going to move on to the final break of our show, actually. We will be back in a few minutes' time once more. You're listening to Today on Beyond Beijing. I'm Abhijan Barua. We're talking with He Xiaoxue and Robert Parkinson in the studio. We've also got Mike Bastian on the line. The discussion topic today, Chinese graduates facing tougher job markets. Don't go anywhere. We'll be back shortly.
Got a comment or question for our panellists? Send us your thoughts via our Weibo. Just go to weibo.com/Today on Beyond Beijing and we'll get your ideas to our experts.
Today's words shape tomorrow's discourse.
The future starts today.
Today's talk, tomorrow's world. Today.
All that coming up in the second half, as always. You're listening to Today on Beyond Beijing. I'm Abhijan Barua. Today's big discussion is, of course, Chinese graduates facing a tougher job market.
And I'm Zhao Yang. So today we're talking in the studio with He Xiaoxue, researcher of MICUS, an educational data consulting firm, and Robert Parkinson, CEO and founder of RMG Selection. And also join us on the line is Mike Bastian, researcher at Nottingham University School of Contemporary Chinese Studies. But now back to our panel discussions. Robert, it seems that during the economic downturn, the current situation, young people, they are often the last to be hired, but first to be dismissed. But is it fair for us to ask the private companies not to do so?
I think that. I think it's a good question, Jay. I think the private companies will ultimately do what is in their best interests. Private companies, by their very nature, are companies in the pursuit of profit, and I think that. To go back to what we were talking about, and particularly with the example of Mike's example of the year-long, sandwich placement year in the UK, I think that's an excellent example of how we could do more with Chinese graduates. I think one thing that's important is that when graduates commit to an internship, they do finish it. And we've had some experiences with people who show up for a couple of weeks and then decide they don't like it and they're off to something else. So I think internships need to be taken seriously. But yes, I think that's certainly a proactive way of addressing things.
And Mac Bastian, so in this case, what kind of suggestions can you give to the young person for their career development?
Well, certainly they need to have some sort of plan. It doesn't have to be a detailed plan over 20 or 30 years, but they need to have some direction, whether that's some sort of industry focus or regional focus or even a particular company or skills they want to develop. And I've found that that's quite lacking in most of the Chinese students that I've taught over many, many years. And in comparison with the UK university students, where, let's face it, the job market is pretty bleak as well, they've been forced to really focus much more on thinking seriously about their careers, thinking seriously about getting a job and long-term development, not just short-term job hopping, which is a characteristic of the younger Chinese generation.
Yes, but once more, does that also beg the question whether or not they need the guidance here to give them that push in that direction? Because as you mentioned right now, sometimes students here, they don't really know what they want, but at the same time they are facing a perceived crisis, which, as it turns out, if you do certain things, it wouldn't be much of a crisis. There may be doors opening for you left, right and centre, but once again, does it come back to the question of them not being pointed in the right direction by anyone, Mike?
I think so. I think they need that push in the first instance, and I think that, again, I keep coming back to this, that the university and even the school system need to take up the responsibility here and really develop these these young people in terms of long-term career development, rather than just push lots and lots of knowledge into their minds. So this job skills and, as Robert said, transferable skills, these need to really permeate all aspects of Chinese university education, and they still do not. Presentation skills, teamwork, group work, that is ever present in a UK university education, regardless of the topic, regardless of the program, and it's really non-existent in Chinese universities even now.
Okay, and Robert?
Just wanted to say that I think in terms of the career advice that people receive at universities, I can remember receiving career advice from different sources, including my parents and careers advisors myself. All were equally useless, I have to say, and I did the exact opposite of the advice that I'd received. And I'd always found, and working the people business, I've always found that actually, frankly, careers advisors seem to know the least about advising on people's careers of anyone out there. And I think engaging people from commerce, industry, business who know a little bit more about jobs and careers in universities would be a very good idea.
Well, then perhaps getting more and more actual professionals into universities to do talks or guest lecturing for students.
Definitely.
What do you think, He Xiaoshui?
Well, actually, I think this is not just who should be blamed or something like that. It's really everyone part from the society need to put in their efforts. It's not just, I think enterprise should also join in to work with schools to let them know what is going on in the society, what they want, what kind of human resource they need. And what the Chinese university are really actually facing in their education is the structural unemployment.
Right.
Because they don't know what the human resource they are actually, the enterprise actually really looking for. That is, I think, very important. It's not just knowledge, but the knowledge which can catch the time.
The knowledge from the other side of the stick as well, I suppose. Is that a fair point, Robert? That maybe it's not just good enough saying we don't have enough good enough people to fill in the vacancies, and actually maybe spreading the word on what they're looking for as well.
Sure. I think when you mention the whole subject of responsibility, and you kind of skirt around the issue of is it the state, is it families, is it universities, I think it completely misses the point. There's only one person who's responsible for their career, and that is the person themselves.
Right.
And I think when they fully realise that and fully understand that their success or failure in life is largely going to be down to them, then I think it'll give a lot of mental clarity in how they move forward. When you give people this impression that, oh, it's not your fault, it was your university or your professor told you the wrong thing, don't worry about it. Yeah, when you give people that message, it absolves them from any responsibility for their own decisions, in a sense, and
almost cushions the blow from the blame as well. I mean, like you said, if you want a job, it's you who's got to do the legwork.
Right.
So, He Xiaoxue, do you agree with Robert on this, or do you think the government or the training programs or the university can still be more involved in the answer to the young unemployment?
I would say it's a yes and no. I definitely agree with Robert with who should be the most motivated person to do the acts. But also, I think when they are not informed, how are they going to do? They need someone to give their guide. They need someone to let them be informed. And especially in China, like the Chinese university, you choose your major at the very beginning when you started. How are you going to expect for senior high school graduate students to get to know what are they going to do, what kind of profession they are going to have in their future?
Yes, I would agree with you, but at the same time, you could also say that Steve Jobs or Robin Li Yan Hong of Baidu decided to become informed about the internet.
Richard
or Baidu.
Branson.
And it was their choice, Richard. Exactly.
Yes, but is this also a case of us possibly holding the majority to the examples of the elite few, such as the example of the person, again, who walked into He Xiaoshui's firm and absolutely charmed the pants off everyone, pardon the expression there, but seems like everybody else doesn't either have the confidence or have the social skills developed? Is there anything that can maybe give those students that extra push?
I think having just said that universities can't have much influence, actually, I think universities can have a degree of influence on developing people's confidence and social skills and ability to interact, which is a hugely important part of winning jobs. So yes, I do think that's important.
So, Mike, would you agree with that? It seems like we're coming to an agreement that the students don't need to be tipped over the edge by somebody else, but just possibly shown which way to walk.
I think so. I think Robert made an excellent point when he suggested more input from business professionals, successful people in their careers who either give guest lectures at universities or maybe have a sort of more, almost a sort of full-time role as some sort of careers advisor, and put the business career into university programs. I think that really is a very, very good way forward for Chinese universities.
And just quickly, we are reaching the end of our discussion here. I just want to bring in one more point. Now, China's college building boom, as it's called, began around 2000 or so. Gained a fair bit of talk by turning vocational schools into four-year colleges. Some decisions that were made about the curriculum, they were made largely in Beijing at the Ministry of Education or by officials. There was hardly any little input from local employers. Is this another example of what we were talking about, the result being a mismatch between graduates with a certain amount of skill or a certain level of skill, but it turns out it's not quite what the employers were looking for in the first place?
Most definitely, I would agree with that. Yes, heavy hand of central government really has a lot to answer for.
Robert?
Yeah, absolutely. I think listening. I think in any organisation, listening on the lowest possible level is very important, and finding out what exactly it is people want and need.
He Xiaoshui, would you agree that maybe if this disparity were to be bridged in the near future, that could provide a lot of answers that we've been trying to find throughout this discussion?
I hope so, and I agree with this.
Right.
And as the wrap-up of this show, Robert, actually youth of today, they are generally more educated and more equipped to deal with the modern technologies, right? So shouldn't they be thriving in getting service jobs?
I think they should, but I think just to go back to your colleague's point, I think people absolutely do need role models, and I think they haven't had them as much as perhaps they've needed them in society. So, the examples we've been talking about here this morning of knocking on doors to see if they have opportunities. No, of course not everyone can do that, because the doors would end up being very busy in most companies. But the fact is, people do need those examples, those role models in society to get themselves moving, as the spark to get themselves moving in the first place.
Mike, we agreed on the role model point?
I think so. I'd just say that the technology and use of technology can actually prohibit development of these most important personal skills and presentation skills. So the younger generations are very savvy when it comes to high technology, but that in itself may block their personal development in terms of interaction and interpersonal skills.
Right, the difference between being able to put up a post on Weibo and then actually presenting yourself at an interview person to person.
Absolutely.
Right,
yeah.
Are we all agreed on that? In the panel? Okay, I see nodding heads all across the board. On that note, we are going to end this great discussion. My absolute thanks to all our guests. You've been splendid. In the studio, we were joined by He Xiaoshui, Senior Researcher of Mycos, an educational data consulting firm. We also had Robert Parkinson, the CEO and founder of RMG Selection, and we were also joined on the line by Mike Bastion, researcher at Nottingham University School of Contemporary Chinese Studies. That brings us to the end of our discussion here on Today. Tomorrow we'll be talking about the British Prime Minister David Cameron facing challenges within his own Conservative Party. Stay with us for Global Talk. That's coming up next with Xu Junduo and John Artman. You're listening to Today on Beyond Beijing.